I was drowning, and no one on that ship even noticed. My name is Ava Bennett. I am 28 years old, and 3 hours ago I was the happiest woman on the Mediterranean Sea. Tonight was supposed to be my 5th wedding anniversary. My husband Marcus had booked the entire top deck of the ship for a private dinner. Candles, champagne, a string quartet he'd flown in from Rome. I remember thinking, as I walked toward the table in the dress he had chosen for me, that I had never loved anyone the way I loved him. Then I saw her, standing beside my husband, wearing my sister's laugh and my sister's earrings, was my own sister, Grace. Her hand was resting on his chest. Not a friendly touch, not an accident. I stopped walking. The quartet kept playing, as if the world hadn't just cracked open beneath my feet. Marcus turned. His face didn't show guilt. It showed something worse, relief. "Ava," he said, "we need to talk to you." We. I looked at my sister. She didn't look away. Behind me, the captain's voice crackled softly over the ship's speakers, announcing that we were now entering international waters, where no laws from home applied. I didn't know yet how much that single sentence would matter. I only knew one thing for certain. Someone on this ship had already decided how my anniversary would end. They just hadn't asked me. The ship had left Barcelona 4 days earlier, and until that night, I would have told you those were the happiest 4 days of my marriage. Marcus and I met when I was 23, waiting tables to pay for design school while he was finishing his MBA. He used to say I was the only person who ever made him laugh without trying. I used to say he was the only person who ever made me feel like slowing down was allowed. We built a life together. He became a partner at an investment firm downtown. I opened a small architecture practice that grew slower than his career, but grew honestly, one client at a time. We bought a house with a kitchen too big for 2 people because we both believed quietly that one day it wouldn't just be 2 people anymore. That hadn't happened yet, not for lack of trying, just for lack of time, we always said. There would be time later. My sister Grace was 3 years younger than me, and for most of our lives, I had been the one who took care of her. When our parents divorced, I was the one who picked her up from school while Mom cried in parking lots. When she failed out of her first college, I was the one who convinced our father to let her move in with Marcus and me for 6 months while she figured things out. Those 6 months had been 2 years ago. I never once considered that they had figured out something else instead. Looking back now, I can see the small things I dismissed as nothing. Grace texting Marcus directly instead of through me, always about something reasonable. Furniture advice, restaurant recommendations. Marcus staying late at the office on nights Grace also mentioned working late at her new marketing job. I dismissed it because dismissing it was easier than asking a question I wasn't ready to hear the answer to. The anniversary cruise had been Marcus's idea. 10 days through the Mediterranean, just the 2 of us, he said, to celebrate 5 years and plan for the next 50. I remember crying when he showed me the itinerary. I remember thinking he had never planned anything so carefully in his life. I didn't know yet that careful planning could serve 2 very different purposes. 3 days before the ship departed, Marcus mentioned, almost casually, that Grace was going through a hard breakup and could use a getaway. He suggested we invite her along, at his expense, so she wouldn't be alone for the holidays. I remember thinking he was being generous. I remember thanking him for thinking of my sister when I hadn't had the time to. I had no idea I was inviting my own replacement onto my anniversary trip and paying for the honeymoon suite myself. The first 3 days on board, something felt different, though I couldn't name it. Marcus seemed distracted during dinners, checking his phone under the table in a way he never used to. Grace seemed unusually attentive to him, refilling his wine before the waiter could, laughing at jokes a half-second before he finished telling them, the way people do when they already know the ending. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself 5 years of marriage made a woman paranoid about nothing, when really, 5 years should have made me trust my own instincts more, not less. On the second night, I woke up at 2 in the morning to find Marcus's side of the bed empty. I told myself he'd gone to get ice, or couldn't sleep, or wanted air. When he returned 20 minutes later, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine, I told myself the ship's hallways probably smelled like everyone's perfume mixed together. I had gotten very good over the years at building explanations for things that didn't need explaining, if only I had let myself see them clearly the first time. On the third day, we docked briefly in Nice. Marcus said he needed to handle a work call and would meet us for dinner. Grace said she wanted to explore the old town alone, to clear her head after the breakup. I spent that afternoon walking the promenade by myself, taking photographs of the water, feeling strangely lonely on a trip, meant to celebrate being less alone than anyone I knew. That evening, at the ship's photography desk, I noticed a folder of proofs waiting for pickup. The attendant, assuming I was collecting for my cabin, handed it to me without checking the name. Inside were photographs from that afternoon in Nice. Marcus and Grace, sitting at a small cafe table in the old town, his hand over hers. Marcus and Grace, walking along a narrow street, her head resting against his shoulder. Marcus and Grace, kissing beside a fountain, in the kind of light that made it look like something out of a film neither of them thought anyone would ever watch. I sat in the ship's photography lounge for almost an hour, staring at images of a man I had trusted completely, and a sister I had raised more than our own mother had, and I felt something inside me go very quiet and very still. Not sadness yet, not anger yet, just a cold, careful clarity, the kind that arrives right before a person finally starts asking the questions they should have asked years earlier. That night, I didn't confront either of them. I smiled through dinner. I laughed at Marcus's jokes. I complimented Grace's new bracelet, which I recognized, with a sensation like swallowing glass, as one I had seen in Marcus's online banking statement 3 weeks earlier, listed simply as gift. Instead, I returned to our cabin, opened Marcus's laptop while he showered, and began looking for anything that might explain what I had just seen. I wasn't looking for an affair anymore. I already had the photographs for that. I was looking for how long it had been planned, and why. What I found instead had nothing to do with romance at all. Buried in a folder labeled Restructuring 2024 were documents with my name on them. Documents I had never seen, never signed, and never been told existed. A trust. My father-in-law's trust, the one that funded Marcus's initial investment in his firm, the one I had always been told belonged solely to Marcus and his brother. My name was listed as a beneficiary, 20%. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, the bathroom door still closed, the shower still running, and read the first paragraph of a document that suggested my entire marriage might have started for reasons that had nothing to do with love at all. The shower shut off. I closed the laptop just as the bathroom door opened, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain Marcus could hear it from across the room. He smiled at me, wrapped in a towel, utterly unaware that the woman sitting on the bed no longer recognized the life she was sitting inside of. "You okay?" he asked. "You look pale." I smiled back, the same smile I had used my whole life to make other people comfortable at my own expense. "I'm fine," I said, "just thinking about tomorrow." I had no idea yet how right that sentence would turn out to be, because tomorrow, Everything I thought I understood about my marriage, my sister, and my own inheritance was about to fall apart in front of nearly everyone I loved. The next morning, I woke up before Marcus, dressed quietly, and went looking for someone who could explain what I had read. The ship had a small business center near the concierge desk, mostly used by passengers checking emails or printing boarding passes. I sat down at one of the terminals and searched for the law firm listed on the trust documents, Whitfield and Cross, based in Boston. I recognized the name vaguely, the kind of firm Marcus's father used for anything involving money he didn't want discussed at dinner. I didn't call them yet. I wasn't ready to hear a stranger's voice confirm what I already suspected. Instead, I did something smaller, something that felt safer. I called my own attorney, Denise Park, a woman I had hired 2 years earlier to handle contracts for my architecture practice. She had never touched anything related to my marriage, which was exactly why I trusted her now. She picked up on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep and confusion at the early hour in the international number. "Ava, is everything okay?" I told her everything. The photographs, the trust documents, the 20% listed under my name. There was a long pause before she spoke again, and when she did, her voice had changed completely, sharp and alert in a way that told me she already understood something I didn't. "Ava, I need you to send me photographs of every page you can find. Today, if possible." "Why? What is it?" I recognized the firm's name the second you said it. Whitfield and Cross specializes in one thing: family trusts designed around marriage contingencies. Meaning what? Meaning some very wealthy families structure inheritance so that a portion only releases or only stays protected if a specific marriage remains intact for a certain number of years. My stomach turned slowly, the way it does on rough water, when the ship itself seems to be the one betraying you. "Are you saying Marcus's father made staying married to me a financial condition?" "I'm saying I need to see the documents before I say anything for certain. But Ava, if that's what this is, it would explain something else. It would explain why the trust review is dated exactly 5 years and 2 weeks after your wedding date." I sat perfectly still. 5 years. Our anniversary. The cruise. "Denise, what happens to the money if the marriage ends before a certain date?" Her answer arrived quietly. I could hear her flipping through something on her end. Typically, in structures like this, if the marriage ends before the vesting date, the contingent beneficiary's share reverts entirely to the other party. In this case, that would likely mean your 20% reverts to Marcus's brother, and Marcus retains full control of his own portion regardless. I closed my eyes. So if Marcus divorces me now, today, before this trust vests, he loses nothing. You lose everything you were entitled to, and whoever benefits from you two staying legally married just a little while longer benefits enormously from delaying that outcome. I thought of Grace's hand on Marcus's chest the night before. I thought of the photographs from Nice. I thought of how careful, how deliberate this entire trip had been. "Denise, what's the vesting date?" She was quiet for a moment, checking something. "Based on the paperwork you described, it looks like 11 days from today." 11 days, the exact length of our cruise. I hung up the phone and sat alone in that small business center for a long time, piecing together a puzzle I had been living inside of without ever seeing its shape. Marcus wasn't planning to leave me before the vesting date. He needed me married to him until it passed. Whatever was happening with Grace wasn't the plan itself. It was what he intended to do the moment the money was safely his, which meant the affair wasn't a betrayal that had escaped his control. It was a betrayal he believed he had timed perfectly. I returned to our cabin to find Marcus dressed and cheerful, suggesting we spend the morning at the pool before our stop in Sicily. I agreed, smiling, tucking away the sick, cold knowledge sitting in my chest like a stone. At the pool, Grace joined us within 20 minutes, wearing sunglasses too large for her face, the kind people wear when they don't want anyone reading their eyes. I watched them together differently now, not as a wounded wife searching for evidence of an affair, as a woman searching for evidence of a plan. I noticed how Marcus kept glancing at his watch, not out of boredom, but the way a man checks a clock when he's counting down to something specific. I noticed how Grace kept looking toward the ship's satellite phone booth near the pool bar, as if waiting for a call she expected to receive. I excused myself to get sunscreen from the cabin, and instead walked toward that same phone booth, standing close enough to hear Grace's voice through the glass a few minutes later, when she stepped inside to take a call. She doesn't suspect anything. She thinks it's just an affair. My hands went cold against the railing. 11 days, that's what he said. After that, it doesn't matter what she finds out. A pause, then quieter. I know it's a lot of money, Dad. I know. But he promised. Once the trust clears, he's filing immediately, and I'll finally have my share too. He said it isn't fair that Ava got the business practice and I got nothing, not after everything. I stepped back from the booth, as though the glass itself had burned me. My father, not Marcus's father. Mine. I hadn't spoken to my father in 3 years, not since he remarried a woman younger than me and stopped returning most of our calls. I had assumed, the way you assume things about people who disappoint you quietly instead of dramatically, that he simply didn't think about us much anymore. I had never once considered that he might be thinking about us very carefully indeed, just not in any way that involved love. I walked back to the pool deck in a daze, sat beside Marcus, and smiled when he handed me a drink, my mind spinning through every family dinner, every casual mention of Grace's financial struggles, every time my father had asked pointed questions about my business's valuation, before disappearing from our lives again. That night, unable to sleep, I did something I had never done in 5 years of marriage. I went through Marcus's phone while he slept, finally understanding that whatever trust I had been protecting no longer deserved protecting. I found a message thread with his brother, Ethan, dated the week before the cruise. Just make sure the paperwork clears before anything happens with Ava. Once it vests, I don't care what you do, Grace, Ava, whoever. Just don't blow it before the 11's days are up. Marcus had replied with a single word. Understood. I set the phone down gently, careful not to wake him, and lay in the dark beside a man who had married me, in part or in whole, because of a number on a legal document I had never been told existed. I thought of my father, orchestrating a plan from 3,000 miles away that positioned my own sister as bait to keep my husband compliant, and positioned me as the one person in the family who wasn't allowed to know the truth about her own inheritance. I thought of 11 days, ticking down like a countdown to my own quiet erasure. And I thought of Denise's voice, calm and certain, telling me exactly what would happen to my money the moment this marriage legally ended. Which meant I finally understood the only question that actually mattered now. Not whether Marcus loved me, not whether Grace felt guilt, but what would happen if I made sure this marriage ended in exactly 10 days, 1 day before anyone else expected it. I opened my own phone, scrolled to Denise's contact, and typed a single message into the dark. I need you to find out everything about my father's involvement in that original trust, and I need a lawyer in international maritime law by tomorrow morning. Her reply came faster than I expected, given the hour. Why maritime law? I looked out at the black water beyond our balcony, endless and indifferent, carrying all of us steadily toward a shoreline none of them knew I was about to reach first. Because I just realized something. We're currently in international waters, and I think that might be the only advantage I have left. The message from Denise didn't come until almost 4 in the morning. I hadn't slept, lying beside Marcus and listening to him breathe evenly, undisturbed, while I rebuilt my entire life in silence beside him. Maritime law won't help the way you think. Marriage dissolution still falls under whichever jurisdiction you file in. But international waters do give you one real advantage. Ship security answers to the captain, not to your husband's family. If something needs to be documented, witnessed, or protected right now, this is the safest place in the world to do it. I read that sentence twice before I understood what she meant. I'm sending you a document now, a post-nuptial disclosure, an asset protection agreement. If Marcus signs this before the vesting date, believing it protects him, it actually protects you instead. But Ava, he has to sign willingly. I can't help you if this becomes coercion. I looked over at him sleeping, so peaceful, so certain the next 11 days would end exactly as he'd planned, and felt something harden inside me that had never been there before. I wasn't going to coerce him. I was going to let him choose, the same way he had let me walk into a marriage without ever mentioning what it was actually built on. The next morning, I requested a private meeting with the ship's staff captain, a quiet, precise woman named Elena Vasquez, explaining only that I needed a secure, neutral space to discuss a sensitive family legal matter with a notarized witness present. Cruise lines, it turns out, deal with far more marital collapses at sea than anyone advertises. She arranged everything within hours, no questions asked beyond what was necessary. That evening, I asked Marcus to join me for a private dinner in one of the smaller specialty restaurants. Just the two of us. No Grace. No distractions. He agreed easily, perhaps relieved, perhaps believing this was simply his wife trying to salvage what remained of our anniversary trip. I let him believe that for exactly as long as it served me. Halfway through dinner, I set down my wine glass and looked at him directly. I know about the trust. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. What trust? Marcus, I found the documents on your laptop. I know the vesting date is in 10 days. I know what happens to my 20% if this marriage ends before then. His face didn't crumble the way I expected. It calculated, the way it always had, the same expression he wore closing business deals. Ava, listen to me. It's not what you think. I also know about Grace, and the photographs from Nice, and the message from Ethan telling you not to blow it before the 11 days were up. Every trace of color drained from his face. You've been following me. No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I've been paying attention. For the first time in 5 years, apparently. He set his own glass down, finally understanding the ground beneath him had already shifted. Ava, please, let me explain. You have exactly as long as it takes me to finish this glass of wine. He talked fast after that, the words tumbling out with the particular desperation of a man who has just realized his careful plan collapsed several steps earlier than he calculated. His father had structured the trust years earlier, believing Marcus needed an incentive to build a stable life rather than drift, as he'd done through his 20s. The 20% listed under my name wasn't generosity. It was leverage, designed to keep Marcus committed to a marriage his own father doubted would last on its own merit. What Marcus hadn't expected was my own father approaching him quietly, 18 months earlier, suggesting an arrangement of his own. If Marcus waited until the trust vested, then divorced me, and eventually involved Grace, my father would ensure Grace received a portion equivalent to what I would lose, arguing it was only fair, given how much attention and inheritance I had supposedly already received, simply by being the eldest daughter who left home first. 2 fathers, 2 separate schemes, colliding conveniently around the same 11 days, using 2 sisters as the currency neither man considered valuable enough to ask permission from directly. "And you agreed," I said quietly, "to all of it. I told myself I still loved you enough that it wouldn't matter. But you didn't stop it." I didn't know how to stop it without losing everything. I nodded slowly, understanding, finally, completely, that I was sitting across from a man who had weighed our marriage against a spreadsheet and decided the spreadsheet mattered slightly more. I reached into my bag and placed the document Denise had prepared onto the table between us. "What is this?" "A postnuptial agreement. It formally separates my 20% from any future division of our joint assets, protecting it entirely as my own, regardless of what happens between us after tonight." He stared at it, understanding immediately what I was asking. "Ava, if I sign this now, before the vesting date, then my share is protected the moment it clears, completely independent of our marriage's future. Which means, Marcus, you can divorce me the day after tomorrow if you want. Grace can have whatever's left of you. But my inheritance is no longer a bargaining chip in either of our father's games." "And if I don't sign?" I leaned back, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Then I file for divorce tomorrow morning, one day before the vesting date, in front of the ship's staff captain and 2 witnesses, ensuring your father's trust reverts entirely to your brother, and neither you nor Grace ever sees a cent of it." Something shifted behind his eyes, the particular fear of a man realizing the woman across from him had already won several moves ago. "You wouldn't." "I already scheduled the appointment." He sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the document, at the woman he had underestimated for exactly as long as it took her to stop underestimating herself. Finally, his hand moved toward the pen. "If I sign this," he said quietly, "what happens to us?" I almost laughed at the question, gentle and strange, and 5 years too late. "Marcus, there is no us. There hasn't been an us since the moment you decided my inheritance was worth more to you than my trust." He signed the document in silence, his signature smaller and shakier than the one on our wedding certificate 5 years earlier. Elena Vasquez, standing quietly by the doorway, stepped forward to notarize the page, along with a second witness from the ship's legal office. When it was finished, I stood, folded the document carefully into my bag, and looked at my husband for what I already knew would be one of the last times I ever would. "There's one more thing," I said. "What?" "Tomorrow morning, before we reach Sicily, I'm going to have a very calm, very public conversation with Grace, not to hurt her, to make sure she understands exactly what our father promised her, and exactly what he never intended to deliver." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" I allowed myself a small, tired smile, the first genuine one I'd felt in days. "I mean, Marcus, that my father structured Grace's promised inheritance to come directly from what he expected me to lose. Which means the moment this document you just signed clears, protecting my 20% permanently, there's nothing left for either of our fathers to give her." I watched the realization land on his face slowly, the particular horror of a man understanding that his mistress was about to discover she had been promised money, that no longer existed. You planned this. No, I said quietly, walking toward the door. I simply stopped letting everyone else plan me. Behind me, I heard him call my name once, softly, uncertain. The voice of a man finally understanding the woman he lost wasn't the same one who had smiled through that anniversary dinner 3 nights earlier. I didn't turn around. Tomorrow, I would face Grace. Tomorrow, I would call Denise with the finalized documents. Tomorrow, 10 days early, I would begin the process of ending a marriage that had never truly been about love at all. But tonight, standing alone on the ship's open deck, watching the black water stretch endlessly toward a horizon no longer tied to anyone else's timeline, I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. I felt like my own. The following morning, I found Grace alone at the small cafe near the ship's atrium, sipping coffee with the particular brightness of someone who believed her future was already secured. I sat down across from her without asking permission. She looked up, startled, then composed herself quickly. "Ava, good morning. We need to talk, just the two of us." Something in my voice must have warned her, because her hand tightened slightly around her cup. "I overheard your phone call yesterday, the one with Dad, near the pool." Her face went pale, but she said nothing. "I know about the arrangement, that Marcus would divorce me after the trust vested, and Dad would make sure you received a portion equal to what I lost. I know you've been planning this for months." She set down her cup, her hands trembling slightly. "Ava, I never wanted to hurt you. You've said that before, so has Marcus. It stopped meaning anything the second time I heard it." She looked down at the table, and for a moment, I saw not the confident woman who had rested her hand on my husband's chest 3 nights earlier, but the frightened, uncertain girl I had spent most of my life protecting. "There's something you should know before you decide how angry to be," I said, keeping my voice level. "Last night I had Marcus sign a document protecting my 20% of that trust permanently, regardless of what happens to our marriage. It's already been notarized. It's already binding." "Okay," she said slowly, not yet understanding. "Which means, Grace, that the money Dad promised you was never actually his to promise. He was counting on my share reverting through the divorce. That share no longer exists to redistribute. There's nothing left for him to give you." I watched the understanding arrive slowly, then completely, her face shifting from confusion to disbelief to something closer to grief. "He used me," she whispered. "Yes. He told me I deserved this, that you'd already gotten everything. The business, the education, the attention. I got 17 years of being the one who held everything together while everyone else made promises they never intended to keep. That's not the same as getting everything, Grace. That's just getting exhausted quietly enough that no one else noticed." She started crying then, not performative tears, but something rawer, the particular grief of realizing your own father viewed you as a tool rather than a daughter. I didn't comfort her. I wasn't ready for that yet, and perhaps I never would be. But I didn't walk away either. "I'm not going to pretend what you did doesn't matter," I said quietly. "It does. It will, for a long time. But I understand now that you didn't build this plan. You were placed inside someone else's plan, the same as I was. That doesn't erase what happened. It just means I know exactly where to direct what's left of my anger." She looked up at me. Her mascara had smudged beneath red, swollen eyes. "What happens now?" "Now, I finish what I came here to do." I stood, leaving her at that small table with her coffee and her collapsed inheritance, and walked toward the ship's business center, where Denise was waiting on a video call, ready to finalize everything. By that afternoon, the divorce filing was complete, submitted one day ahead of the trust's vesting date, exactly as I had promised Marcus the night before. Because of the post-nuptial agreement he had signed, my 20% remained fully protected, entirely separate from the dissolution of our marriage. Ethan, Marcus's brother, would eventually receive his originally intended share as well, though considerably diminished once the full trust review was completed and several years of questionable consulting fees paid to Marcus's father surfaced during the audit that followed. My own father called 3 times over the following week. I let each call go to voicemail. Eventually, I listened to them, not out of forgiveness, but out of a need to finally hear, clearly and without illusion, exactly who he had always been. In the final message, his voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Ava, I only wanted to make sure Grace was taken care of. I never meant for it to come at your expense. I deleted the message without responding. Some apologies arrived too late to matter, and some explanations only confirm what silence had already told you. The ship completed its remaining stops without me at Marcus's side. I spent those final days walking alone through small coastal towns I had once imagined celebrating 5 wonderful years of marriage in, discovering instead that I was celebrating something entirely different. The end of believing my worth depended on how much I sacrificed quietly for people who had already decided my value in numbers I never agreed to. 6 months later, my architecture practice secured the largest contract of its history, a boutique hotel renovation project along the very coastline I had once sailed past. Broken-hearted, without knowing it, I used part of my protected inheritance to expand the studio, hiring 3 new architects, finally building something entirely my own, free of any family's quiet conditions. Marcus and Grace's relationship ended less than 4 months after the cruise. I heard, through mutual acquaintances rather than any direct contact, that neither of them ever quite forgave the other for what the collapse of that shared plan had cost them. My father reached out one final time nearly a year later, asking to meet. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity rather than hope. Over coffee, he apologized in the vague, unspecific way people do when they've rehearsed contrition, without actually examining what they did wrong. I listened politely, thanked him for his time, and told him I wasn't interested in rebuilding a relationship built on the same quiet conditions as my marriage had been. He hasn't called since. I don't expect he will. Grace and I speak occasionally now, carefully, the way 2 people do when rebuilding something from wreckage neither of them fully caused alone. It isn't friendship yet. It might never fully become what it once was, but it's honest, which is more than either of us had with anyone else in our family for most of our lives. I still think sometimes about that first night on the ship, watching my husband's hand find my sister's chest as though I were furniture in my own anniversary dinner. I think about how close I came to spending 11 more days believing love was something you earned by staying quiet and grateful, rather than something that required honesty from everyone at the table, not just yourself. I keep one photograph from that trip, not the ones from Nice that shattered everything, but one taken the first night aboard, before I knew any of it. In it, I'm standing at the ship's railing, hair loose in the wind, smiling at a life I believed was solid beneath me. I don't look at it with sadness anymore. I look at it as a reminder of a woman who was about to learn, in the most painful way imaginable, that her own worth was never something anyone else was entitled to calculate for her. The ship eventually returned to Barcelona, carrying passengers back toward lives they'd paused for 10 days at sea. Mine had changed so completely that returning to the life I'd left almost felt like stepping into someone else's story. But it wasn't someone else's story. It was finally, entirely, mine. Thank you so much for watching. Drop a comment below, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.